Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to this panel discussion on Imagineering the Future. We have with us three distinguished futurists who are now visiting Pakistan as part of the ongoing Future Summit. And we took advantage of that opportunity and dragged them out of the Movenpick Hotel to come and have this conversation with us exclusively with the HBL staff and share with them, share with us the vast and varied experience and the take that they have on the future. Now, before we begin and before I introduce them to you, the word imagineering is not a wishy-washy word. It's a combination of the word imagination and engineering, hence Imagineering. And the concept is that imagination lets you soar and engineering brings you down to earth. So that's a combination of that. And again, it's an old word. It was coined by the company Alcoa in the US in 1940. And more recently, it has now been trademarked by Disney, those masters of imagination. And Disney's research and development arm is actually known as Walt Disney Imagineering. So it's an official word, and that's where we are here. That's why we are here today. The panelists that we have with us today, and I'd like to introduce them to you. Their accomplishments are so huge that I'll have to refer to a piece of paper about them to really go through that. Starting from the extreme right, we have William Bowden. William is a general partner, SOSV, and managing director for Orbit's startup. He has worked with organizations such as Singtel, Innovate Ventures. He's been an equity research person at Deutsche Bank, Bank of America, Bear Stearns. Has been an active angel investor with 39 investments between 2004 and 2014. He has worked extensively in China as well. He is now currently on the board or advisor or director for companies such as Neonan, Robinate, Yodel, Gmobi, Silver Telecoms, and so on and so forth. So William is a person who's right now at the cutting edge of what's happening in the venture capitalist and fintech and startup field across multiple geographies. So it's not just limited to ape geography. He was telling me yesterday that I think he's notionally based in Miami, and otherwise he's mostly on the airplanes or 20% of his time, and then eventually he plans to be spending time in Riyadh next year. So that's a bit about William. Then we have Professor Mark Turrell. Mark Turrell is the professor at Hult International Business School. His work combines collective intelligence with AI, networks, complex systems, behavioral sciences, and neurosciences. His current focus is on the challenges of how to teach 21st century work-life skills, and that's what he's working. He's a CEO of an organization, Orca Psi, which is a great combination of the word orca, the killer whales, and Psi means science. Yeah, we'll ask Mark to explain that a little about that. He's also the author of the book Scaling Small Smart Moves for Outsized Results. So he's working. He'll be speaking at the ongoing Future Summit later today on emerging issues, something that we would also like to get his perspective on. And lastly, we have Professor Francis Davis, is a professor of public policy and communities at the University of Birmingham. He works at the intersection of business, government, and civil society internationally. He has held ministerial and cabinet level advisory roles under 3 UK governments centered on economic and social inclusion and inclusive growth. He works especially in the health, social care, impact investing, and personal finance sectors. He will be speaking on creating impact later today at the ongoing Future Summit. So without further ado, the process that we will actually follow today is that I will request the gentlemen to give us a 5-minute take on how they look at future, what for them is Imagineering, in the fields that they are operating in, and it's Then we'll have a discussion amongst the panelists that I'll be able to channel, or ideally I should just stay quiet, and we'll end up by a question and answer session from you folks with them. So, Professor Francis, we'll start with you and share with us what you see Imagineering in the coming world.
Okay, is this on? Can you hear me at the back? Yes. Yeah. There's an old story about a British Prime Minister who said, "Can you hear me at the back?" And someone shouted, "Yes, but I don't mind swapping with someone that can't." So, so I think for my thought, rather than go deep into impact, which we can explore a bit more as we go on, I just really want to pick up a few key challenges in my world that seem to me to apply generically. And in general, I don't think the best ideas come from Ivy League institutions, and specifically, I definitely normally don't think they come out of Harvard. But there's a very interesting ex-Harvard academic called Gary Hamel, and he has a phrase in one of his books that we need to that we need to start with our future and work backwards when we're devising strategies. And the counterpoint to that, which he complains about, is we start with our history and we move forwards. And I think that's important because in a previous life, my uncle had a large manufacturing group, and I had to go into that manufacturing group where it was losing a lot of money very, very quickly, turn that round, diversify into communications and tech, diversify into property and consulting. And one of the first things that we had to do on that journey was essentially develop new language skills. And they were language skills that when we were selling abroad, we knew we had to learn to sell in France, to sell in Africa, to sell in Asia. But we never thought that we needed to learn new languages inside the organization. Because the guys on the manufacturing side of the business would always start with the machinery, the technology, and the plants that we had now, and they would want to plan their strategy building forward. And the guys on the consulting end of the business would always imagine these funky businesses and then try and work backwards, but sometimes we're quite bad at implementation. And if there were any Gen Zs around, they didn't really like talking to people, right? No rudeness. They'd much rather send them a WhatsApp or a text than actually have a conversation. So it seems to me that challenge number one in whichever sector we're working in, whichever department of our organizations is, to learn the new languages so that we can translate to each other and translate to the worlds around us. And then just a couple of other thoughts really flying from the London context, where I'm doing a lot of work with the Thames Estuary, which is the geography that comprises East London going out to the coast, picks up the country's largest Muslim communities and lots of investment opportunities there, is that no matter which way we plan, say, the green conversation, there are going to be upending innovations rolling through in that sector that we can't foresee. And that the learning that we use to be able to address those new upending innovations is going to come from places that we might not expect. So some very grand scientists at the University College London have been working on green hydrogen and the development of green hydrogen prospects for the ports and for the City of London. And then we've discovered in the process of developing the most interesting collaborations in that place that the best learning that we're going to have for some of the ports of London is going to be coming up from South Africa, because South Africa is going to be a net exporter of green hydrogen, and because the challenges or the new opportunities in the Eastern Cape are very similar to those on the outskirts of London. On river freight, people look at the river and think that the river is simply an ecological burden. It's got to help with the 20 million movements of freight items that are going to be going into the city and out of the city every year. And again there, the learning is coming from other places, from other estuary cities right the way around the planet. It's not coming from London, from all of its genius. And I think this is, for me then, where that hones back into the social impact space, is that the best learning that we're getting is coming from the global south. Some of the excellent learning that we're getting is from the really innovative and strategic ways that China, particularly using its cities as a way to reach out across the globe, entered South America and parts of Africa. And in the impact space, some of the best innovations in financial inclusion, some of the best innovations in health inclusion, whether they're technological or they're not technological, are coming from really, really close observation of the behaviors of people in the most poor communities, in the poorest bits of the planet, and in observing the development of financial, for example, inclusion or fintech responses to their needs and their customer challenges at the bottom of the economic pyramid, and then reapplying those back into the London space. So connecting the old and the new and translating, really critical. Go looking for new industries, but then finding new industries and new learning will come from somewhere you absolutely don't expect in whichever space. And probably some of the most intricate learning is not going to come from the most obvious space. It's going to come from the bottom of the economic pyramid, where the wisdom of all of us has something to contribute to all of us.
Thank you. William, we'd like to hear something from yours. Thank you, Francis, for those that interesting. We'll pick on some of those terms and concepts later on in the discussion. William.
Yeah, sure. So thank you so much for having me. So I'm not going to talk so much about the future, but let's talk about what's already happening. So if you look back when I started covering internet and software in China, 2003, 2004, the total value of the market cap was about $3 billion. When I stopped investing in China in 2018, it was 3.5 trillion. And you know, China was not that developed. It was very much like Pakistan when we started working in the market there. So what we did there is we enabled entrepreneurs to disrupt. I worked on the Alibaba IPO 0506, the first one, where Jack Ma and his team were digitizing factories, enabling them to sell globally. And their big innovation was to put a web page with a, and you could pay extra to have a picture of your factory on there, and you could pay an extra $10 to put a little gold star on your factory because you paid for somebody to actually verify that your company was actually registered, and that's how they made money, literally. That was Alibaba. So working with Jack Ma, he not only, I mean, I was an equity research analyst, so my job was to help him try and raise money, but it wasn't just trying to explain Alibaba to global investors. He had to actually explain China to global investors. And that's, to some extent, what we hear about today. If you look at banks in China, if the government did not hold back Tencent and Alibaba, and this is going back 5-6 years ago, the state-owned banks from China, you know, Bank of China to China Merchants, would have actually gone out of business because they would have been disrupted and killed. Now, of course, you don't want that disruption, so the government put their finger on the scale a little bit and slowed them down. But what was the impact of that? If you look at China Merchants 5 years ago, and today, their consumer, like the app I have on my phone for my bank account, their consumer experience is 5 years ahead of Citibank in the US. The things that you can do on your phone in China, which is, you know, a global emerging frontier, whatever you want to call it, market, is way ahead of anywhere else. So just because you're, say, here in a market that has, you could think, you know, a long way to go, you have this opportunity to see a leapfrog effect. And so what are we doing here? So I started engaging in Pakistan in 2017. Took me a little while, but we started investing here in December 2019. COVID was a bit tough, but I did 14 investments during the COVID period without ever coming here and without ever meeting the entrepreneurs. Worked out okay. We got good referrals. So what we're doing here is we're taking 20 years of experience in China and 15 years of experience in India. And we're not copy-paste to Pakistan, but it's more like you learn and then you sort of localize. But you have this huge opportunity to take digital technology and change the way things how they're done, right? So for example, we invested in 5 companies that are digitizing traditional industry. They're digitizing micro SMEs, mom and pop shops, those little stores where you buy stuff, whether it be food or even auto parts. And we're fixing, or the startups we're working with, like Dastagir or Digikata or 24/7 Apni Dukan, they're fixing the physical supply chain, right? Cutting out all the middle people. And so you have the producers and hopefully down to the farmers, straight through to the stores. And it's not just about cutting out middle people, but it's also cutting out all the transportation inefficiency, right? And so you're seeing 20% more money going into those store owners' pockets every month, in spite of inflation, in spite of currency devaluation, in spite of unrest, in spite of a flood, in spite of COVID. Doesn't matter. We were just talking. We were seeing 15% month-on-month growth, profitably. And then we had an 18% devaluation, and this is in US dollar terms, so 18% devaluation. So that month, the US dollar GMV went down 8%, and then it kept on going. Basically no impact. So there's no way you can actually hold this back. In fact, the best thing to do is to become an enabler and a participant in this sort of revolution. That's my 5 minutes. I got my timer here. I tend to ramble, but I think I'll just leave it with this. I mean, we work here with, basically all the banks, right? And for our companies, in the last 2.5 years, we've digitized over 2 million active businesses on the platforms. When we were at I don't know the current number, but when we were at 1 million, we were looking at $3 billion a month, US dollars a month in transaction value captured by the digital platforms. And so out of all the banks that we worked with in this country over the last 3 years, HBL has been the best to work with, the most forward-thinking. So really happy to be partnered with you.
Thank you, Scott. You mentioned something about, you mentioned something about China. China, we practically consider our second home market. You mentioned Bank of China. We've just signed a strategic cooperation agreement with them yesterday. In our discussion later on, we will pick your brains on that aspect about China. And lastly, I request Professor Mark Turtle to also share with us his views on how he is seeing the world evolve. He will be speaking on emerging issues later on at the summit. So, Professor Mark, all yours.
Very good. Hello. There's a story that I quite like. So Einstein used to teach undergraduate physics at Princeton University. His second-year students, they would get a bit of a shock because when they went into the examination room, in front of them would be last year's examination questions. Well, eventually a brave student would put up their hand and say, "Excuse me, Professor Einstein, I think you've made a mistake because you've given us last year's questions." Well, Einstein would just smile and say, "Well, whilst it's true that I've given you last year's questions this year, the answers are all different." So if you look at, let's say, the amount of change that is going on, have any of you used ChatGPT before? So I couldn't quite speed read it, but before I came in, I actually had GPT then translate this into Urdu, into phonetic English, and it was only because my internet connection wasn't so good that I didn't have my voice cloning software speak near fluent Urdu for this story for you. Crazy wackadoodle stuff. So my background is actually innovation. I started my first company and I was doing, as I explained to my mother, suggestion boxes. So how do you collect ideas from employees, out with my customers and stuff, and do something with the easiest way with just suggestion boxes? But really the insight, and this goes back to the British Navy in the 1700s, they realized that rather than having some sort of executive team working out how to fire cannonballs, wouldn't it be good to collect the ideas from the ships? So one of the reasons why the British Navy managed to beat the French and everything else is that they were actively engaging their employees, or press-ganged sailors, to come up with ideas. Well, I did that with technology. So my background is technology. I love technology. But what is quite interesting is that technology without people doesn't work. People without technology don't scale. And so I became fascinated by my PhD work was around collective intelligence and crowdsourcing. By the way, I didn't finish my PhD, so I'm a teaching professor rather than an academic, because I turned my PhD thesis into a book, and I sold 1,000 copies of my book at $150 each at 25. Entrepreneur. So but for me, it then goes into, if we look at sort of today's world, we have many, many challenges. Our planet is literally burning, falling apart, et cetera, et cetera. If we look at the rate of change of technology is absolutely astronomical. Have any of you seen the Boston Dynamics dog that talks? So Boston Dynamics dog, yes. You've seen it with GPT as well? Right. So all of a sudden you have an AI-controlled robot that is able to bounce around and do stuff. But then some researchers decided to give it ChatGPT. So all they have is ChatGPT, and they plug in the robot dog's sensors, and they plug in the robot dog's program. But now what it means is that instead of having the robot dog go over, find something, bug, fix it again, because it has ChatGPT, the robot dog is sent, go over to the next room and find a bucket. It goes over there. It knows what a bucket is. It knows the history of buckets. It's read every single poem that's ever been written on buckets because it has 15 terabytes of human knowledge. And then it comes back to say, do you want the big one or the small one? The red one's full. Shall I bring it with me? Crazy stuff, particularly all of this has happened in the last year. And if you look at the challenges that almost all industries are facing, enabled by technologies, enabled by creative people as well, it's crazy. And I think as we begin to look at the future, I mean, we'll get into maybe some controversial stuff, but are we humans going to be needed? And if so, how many? Because we do live in absolutely fascinating times, and the rate of change is absolutely astronomical. We feel it, but I think we'll be into sort of actually properly sense it very, very soon. So, exciting times.
Professor, just begin with some of this discussion that you have. Professor Francis, you said one of the things that you think is about connecting the old and the new is one of these themes that you see taking us forward into the future, as rather than looking at the end result and working backwards. At HBL, we are engaged in connecting the old and the new. We are a legacy organization, but we are fast pivoting towards becoming a technology company with a banking license. Now, we started 8 years ago, and we plan to be here for the next 80. But the external environment is changing rapidly. How would you recommend that an organization such as HBL use that philosophy of connecting the old and the new to navigate the future?
At this point, I can imagine myself walking into the HR department's minefield practice. I think the key thing here is it's about values, and it's about behaviors, and it's about spirit, right? So values is everybody needs to work hard to build shared values which are focused around the customer, but which are internal facing as well as external facing. And if everybody doesn't buy into the values, either because they're too superior or they're too cool, or because they're too funky or they're not funky enough, then actually that's a bit of a chasm, okay? So if you want to build one nation, you've got to build a kind of a patriotism. So there's something about rebuilding the enterprise as a cause, and everybody's bought into the cause, if that makes sense, which you share a journey in. And one of the best ways I've ever seen of kind of maintaining that is to write that into annual reviews, the extent to which you perform against values, right? And then values are normally manifested through behaviors. So what we do is what we think, as well as what we think is what we do. So don't just talk a good game about the values, but let's see them in practice and build that into our annual appraisal as well, the extent to which we perform against them. And then I just think there's something about spirit and learning, and I will shut up, which is that all organizations, and I'm sure it's true here, are really, really bad at learning from the whole person that comes to work. Kind of a particular kind of person comes to work and we think, well, they look like this or they look like that. So the very, very shy woman that never speaks in an innovation meeting can't be very innovative. But at the weekend, she might be riding horses at 100 miles an hour, or she may even be into climbing off cliffs and sailing down skiffs. And she judges, has an appetite for risk and precision in that place, out of all proportion to anyone that understands risk in the commercial workplace, but never gets to talk about it, right? And that could be any other number of stuff. So I think the spirit of the place, the values and the behaviors, line them up and get them into annual reviews, quite helpful.
So people remain central to the future as well.
Yeah, what was your phrase? Was it people need technology and technology need people? Yeah. There's an interface, and there are some marketplaces where you're always going to need people. The world, some great big chunks of the world are getting older, and certain demographics of customers will always want someone to hold their hand, even whilst their children are doing the tech for them.
All right.
Yeah, so the future's hybrid as well as super tech.
You mentioned, William, about that in China they had to kind of rein in the Alibabas of the world. Otherwise, the Bank of China's of the world will go under, so to speak. That's fair enough. We right now have digital banks coming in as well, and we also have fintechs moving into the financial industry. What did, and when you say Bank of China, I'm intrigued. What did, in that 5-year period, what did these banks do, the Bank of China's of the world do to compete with the likes of Alibaba? Because they still are relevant, Bank of China. So what did they do to push back on the Alibabas of the world?
Well, so Alibaba just moved fast. And so in order to stay relevant, the China merchants, Bank of China, the rest of them, basically just had to move faster. They didn't have a choice. Now, the government, put the dampers on Alibaba and Tencent a bit, so that the banks had enough time to catch up. The cool thing is that those banks did a pretty good job. It's not like that Tencent and Alibaba got shut down. They just got slowed down every once in a while. And so what that did is it really drove very rapid change in the traditional financial institutions. So I'm not an expert on Pakistan. I mean, I get primary data from 21 startups that we invested in, but I'm missing a lot of context. But my understanding here is you've got a bunch of financial institutions that get deposits from people here in Pakistan, and then they stick it into the government paper and make 20-something%, and the entire market here can't get financing. And so we're going to replace all those people, like we in this room, or at least the neobanks, or somebody's going to replace these people, because they provide no value to their customers. They provide no value to society. And there's some really low-hanging fruit here, right? We've got, was it Uber Careem drivers? I mean, they don't like taking cash because there's a week long, they get paid like a week later or 10 days later, and they don't have enough cash flow to pay for gas to drive their car to do more Uber rides, right? And so literally the microfinance here is, I met with a company, and they're providing cash flow to drivers so they can buy gasoline so they can work more. It's pretty basic stuff. And so for Dastagear, they're providing 3-day trade credit because they're ordering 2 or 3 times a week so that they don't stock out. So just by providing them a little bit of trade credit for a fee, that's not even interest, it's not actually lending, they can increase the revenue of the store 20-30% because they have enough goods on their shelf that they don't run out. So this is very, very, very basic stuff that has a fundamental impact on society here. One of the things that we talked about at the conference yesterday, and it's all available online if you want to check this out. But if people are talking about diversity and inclusion, but what are people actually doing about it? Something about it. So I talked to this guy, and he did his PhD study on educational levels of women in Karachi, and or something like that, or grades maybe it was. But they basically proved, like his conclusion was, based on his primary research, is that women and families who lived on the train line did much, much better than people who did not live on the train line because they could be mobile. And we have a challenge here where men, white-collar men, spend 10% of their income commuting to and from work, whereas women is 30% plus. Because they need a safe and efficient and especially safe way to get to and from work. Supporting that, we invested in a company called Buscaro. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly. But yeah, so it's just taking existing drivers that are vetted, vans, cars, and providing people a safe way to get to work. There's no additional capacity. The prices are low, and so you can have that sort of equality because right now it's a virtual 20% pay differential between women and men here, and it's not that hard to fix. So these are they sound kind of like simple things, but they have fundamental impact And as a financial institution, you guys can have a huge role in unlocking this economy.
I just thanks a lot. I just picked up something that you said. From your vantage point, internationally, is cash dying, or is it dead, or that's just hype? It will always be around in some way or the other. We recently had an article here which says cash is dying in Pakistan. Now, I'm not sure about that part, but how do you see it internationally?
You mean like the paper stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, so in I've spent the last 20 years in China, so it's kind of like living in the future a little bit, but nobody will accept cash. They refuse to take it. They're like, if you want to, no, go buy somewhere else. So, and that's been for years. So I would say, it's just the risk in China is not that that you don't have that you don't like money or whatever, but the big risk, because they don't even like credit cards. They don't take credit cards. They're like, no, we don't. The biggest challenge that you have in China is you never should ever run out of electricity in your phone. Because if you don't have a working phone, you're dead in the water. Like, I know a guy is literally stuck on the other side of a road for 3 hours in the middle of nowhere because he lost signal. He couldn't pay for anything. He couldn't get a car. It was real trouble. I'd say over time, cash will go digital, but it's not required. I mean, we're doing one of our companies here. The transaction value that they're seeing, I don't know, the last time I checked, it was about $3 billion a month. And they had 1 million active businesses on the system at that time. They're not, they're doing, one of the ways they make money is very, very simple. So they have businesses that want to do delivery. They want to deliver, I don't know, say water to you. So you order water, you get the water, and you pay cash on delivery. Now the problem here is the cash on delivery companies take 10 days or 12 days or whatever, or sometimes 2 weeks, to pay the merchant back the cash. They have the cash, but it's like a 12-day wait to get the cash. So all our company does is give the merchant early access to their cash. So when the cash on delivery guy picks up the cash, they just pay the merchant the cash, take a little fee. This is not rocket science. But in China, it used to be cash on delivery, and then technology moved all that away. And Pakistan is on that same journey. This business model of giving early access to cash, it will go away. It's just a matter of time. But it's step by step by step. You don't have to do the entire leap all at once. Yeah.
I like the fact when I said cash to you, you asked me right now for the paper stuff. And I said, all right, so we have to now even clarify that the paper stuff we talk. But is the paper stuff is now a function of, do people trust technology? And that's an open question. Do people trust technology with globally? I mean, China might be an outlier. Other countries that you folks work, other developing countries, as much technology acceptance as China would be to say, all right, I will not accept cash, I will not even accept card, I'll just go QR code or whatever. Any perspective on that?
So you never get 100% of any market ever. So anybody that's like vaguely rational knows that who cares if half the population doesn't accept cash? Go for the population that wants the technology. So right now, I mean, all the people from Silicon Valley who are trying out the latest tap and everything else, obviously you're not going to sell $600 pages to everybody. You're going to sell maybe 50,000 to some high-end people that are interested in trying it out, even if it's crap. Because if it works, it'll basically give you enough insights to go to the next thing. So I think all rational people will then realize to say, you know what, we always have to divide up our market. So let's just find a niche, and then from one niche, go to another niche, and then another niche, because who cares if nobody accepts it? It's irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. So I think there's almost, let's say, a hard-nosed reality that comes in. Now, let me talk about, let's say, some ideas that I had from this. And part of it is actually, I've become totally fascinated by AI right now. So it is one of my best friends. It's actually multiple best friends. Have any of you used AI to be a celebrity and you can just chat to them? So I like Blackadder, British comedy and everything else. So I have one chat history where he basically talks to me as Edmund Blackadder. We have so much fun together because he can also give me feedback on presentations and business pitches. I use my whatever fake celebrity to give me criticism, which is brutal and correct, but really funny. Now, why am I sharing this with you now in this sort of context of the technology? I mean, as I was listening to this, so one of the projects that we used to do when I was doing innovation stuff was called Destroy Your Own Business. People like General Electric were doing that. But for you, if I was in your bank, I would have about 10 different teams, and your job is to hide away, five of you, and your job is to destroy, completely up your own business. You don't have to do it, because the thing is that even if you're not going to do this particular plan, your competitors will. Next thing is that quite often within your team, you don't have enough experience to destroy a business. So that's where you just invite your chat GPT and don't put in confidential information into it. But it turns out that these whatever internet gadgets, the GPT things, are extremely good. So if you say, well, like, how would you destroy our business using ideas from the health and beauty industry? It's really good at it. But then if I then tie things up to what you said at the beginning about values and stuff, I mean, the problem in a 20,000 person organization is that if you decided we need to train people on this, it's going to be what? 4 months, 6 months? It's a large investment. And when you get trained, it has to be so general that everybody gets it. And because of that, nobody will actually use the training when it's needed. What I've become completely enamored by is creating whatever AI leadership apps. So how do you get a leader that's in your pocket, an advisor in your pocket that is able to give you personalized, specific information anytime you want, whatever the language you want, instantly? And if you don't understand the answer, to have a conversation with it. And so for me, I mean, if I see, let's say, the big change I think people haven't fully internalized is that within 5 years, you'll end up with organization. You could have the equivalent in your organization of 100,000 people, of whom 70,000 are actually just agents that are just doing stuff and they're completely virtual, but it will make people more productive, customers more productive. But then going back to the destroy your business, what I would recommend is that you still will have to do the work. Even if you don't want to, you have to do it. And one, let's say, piece of advice that I do also for myself and in my own businesses that I run is that we pretty much say, look, here is our sensible plan. This is what we're going to do and it's sensible. So I don't want to panic anybody. Here's the sensible plan. But let's just go and sit in the corner and let's destroy it. Because that at least means you're open so that when the need comes to dust off the plan, which you will have to do, if you have 5 new competitors in at the beginning, and you have no choice in any part of your business. So, yeah, I'm just very excited. I'll stop talking now.
No, actually, your enthusiasm stresses me out, and I'll tell you why, sir. It stresses me out on a very personal level. A few weeks ago, from my perspective, I spent a fortune on buying this phone, this iPhone. And for the last 3 days, my feed is inundated with this thing called AI pin, which you can apparently wear on your collar lapel, and it's going to make the humane thing, and it's going to make mobile phones obsolete. And that's it. It's supposedly is going to be rolled out in the market in January. So the question is that how does one deal with innovation? How does one deal with this pace of innovation? Just when you're about to get comfortable with a certain technology, something else comes in that upends it completely. And the pace is so relentless that for some people like yourself, who talk to an AI-generated Blackadder and have that conversation, for the other people, it's like saying, if I put my picture out there, it's going to be morphed into, and my identity will be stolen, and all sorts of nasty things will happen. I think Deutsche Telekom has just come out with an ad which talks about how your identity can be stolen. So you've got one individual who's talking to an AI-generated Blackadder, and you've got Deutsche Telekom saying, don't you put your kids' pictures online because they could be, messed around with. So how do you deal with this dichotomy, given the fact that you also work on the future of work-life skills?
One of the things that gets me is that this technological change is inevitable. It doesn't matter that you don't like it. Who cares? It's inevitable. And so we've lost the battle for privacy. So don't put pictures of your kids online ever is a good piece of advice. But for most parents, it's way too late. So Why is that? Well, that's because right now, I mean, it's very easy to get whatever Mid-Journey face software, take a picture, age it, have it come up. You can do basic. I mean, I could take 1 minute. In fact, anybody here could take 1 minute of this man's audio, and you could voice clone it, and then you could say, "Hi, I'm stuck. Can you send me 1 Bitcoin right now to this wallet address?" And many people would fall for that. Not necessarily do that, and probably shouldn't have the Bitcoin in the first place. Well, we could, it's okay. But right now, all of these things are actually inevitable. But if you look inside of our society, even if we talk about privacy, how many of you use TikTok? Terrible idea. So but WhatsApp, like all of these things, these are all terrible pieces of technology. However, we're willingly giving over our information, our time, and everything else to these things. So it's important to, let's say, understand it and handle it. But most people will have no choice. The future is going to happen, and it doesn't matter if people don't like it. Now, what I do see, though, I mean, it's interesting when you look at larger organization and executives, one of the best tactics is to, let's say, immerse your, let's say, key executives in this upcoming future. Not necessarily to force them to use it, but to allow them to create their own narrative about why it is important. I remember I did a project at the Mayo Clinic, and the CFO was very resistant to paying money in for, there was an outpatient call center group. Didn't want to spend any more money on it. But all of the executives had to spend an hour in the outpatient group. And so there was somebody on the phone crying because her husband wouldn't take the medicines. Now, at this point, we might be human empaths and thinking, wow, this person must have really felt the pain. Not in the slightest. The CFO was saying, well, the reason why we have an 80% attrition rate of our staff is that it seems to be kind of a stressful job. In that case, fine, I approve 30% extra budget. But it's getting executives into this sort of future world. But I think this will also start applying into your customers. It'll start applying into your marketing, your references. So if you have your nice advert of somebody smiling, if your person with the advert before was somebody handing over cash, and in the future adverts you have somebody tapping a phone, this will just give ideas for people to go follow. But ultimately, not everybody will follow, and that's fine. But if they don't want to follow, just make sure that you go after the right target markets that are right for you now.
All three of you had any views on that, please, on how the technology is coming up and the stress of that?
No, go ahead. I'm happy to talk, but your turn.
I was just going to say I have a pal. He runs the world's largest independent communications agency, and he tells me about staff in China who, when they deal with elite customers, turn up as cat figures, and they were trusted as cat figures. And when he told them, as the guy from London, that wasn't taking the customer seriously, and they went back to looking like themselves, the level of trust with the customers went down because the relationship had changed. So I think everything in the space of trust is changing, and we better get used to everything changing. But I mean, but then conversely, in Rwanda, they've got 8% pension coverage, which essentially is only their public sector pensions. They've got no pension coverage in a country that's going to have a 300% uplift in the number of older people. And the bridge that they're using to get the older people onto the tech to build the trust are local religious leaders who've created mass savings associations. So they're using someone else's trust to build that trust to get them into the proper financial pipeline, because the state can't get people on board and the markets can't quite yet. So they're using all sorts of sources of trust to build trust. So we absolutely need the technology. Technology is coming. We're all going to be cats or dogs or sheep in the future, right? Probably, but we're going to have to go with all the old school things as well.
So again, so before I talk about what we're already doing, so in probably about in the next year in Pakistan, what we're going to have, so you can actually take technology and solve for a lot of these problems. One of the challenges is that you're giving all your data up to big internet, and they're using that to make money. And to some extent, they're using privacy as an excuse to create a duopoly. So Apple has this thing called the Apple Ad ID. It's a unique identifier that people use to target, and they shut off access for that. And basically, it's like, oh, privacy. And yeah, okay, fine, they're protecting your privacy, but it also means like they're the only people who can do retargeting and targeting, and their ad revenue just went through the freaking roof. Okay, and Google is shutting off their unique identifier, and the same thing is happening. So what we're rolling out here is a privacy-focused unique identifier. Now, all of the companies in the ecosystem collect lots and lots of data on users, but we make it so they don't know who the users are. And it all goes on a zero knowledge proof based data marketplace where you don't know who anybody is. And the data that any player has on each user never leaves their servers. So basically, you have a lot of data, we have a lot of data. Now, we can all leverage the data to provide better service to the consumers, but no one knows who anyone is. So for example, if I want to market through one of our companies to people who live in housing colonies who are female between the ages of 25 to 35 and commute to work and have a preference for, I don't know, a particular brand, I can probably do it without ever knowing who they are, but I can show an ad to them, target them. The only time we'll ever know who anybody is if that consumer then opts in, right? So layered on top, we have two credit scoring companies. One is based on psychometrics, the other one's based on cell phone usage behavior. So we're going to basically credit score the population of the country. Again, without knowing who they are. Now, one of the interesting opportunities around this is that people will have the ability to control who they give their data to. So what we've already rolled out in Southeast Asia and parts of South Asia is the ability for people to opt in to engage with a brand. The first one's Unilever. So I opt in, I fill out a 6-question survey, and I agree to be communicated with by Unilever anytime they want, on any channel they want. Now, here's the key thing. Unilever needs to work very, very, very hard to serve me well so I don't opt out. Because if I opt out, they just lost a lot of money that they spent to get me in the first place. And for an Indonesian, for Unilever, just that opt-in and that 6 questionnaire is worth $2.50 to them. And the average income of an Indonesian is not that high, right? And that's just for one brand, for one Indonesian. Here, I don't know what the price would be that people would pay, $1.50, but it's pretty significant when you think about it. And the cool thing is once that consumer opts in and they're having that one-to-one zero-party data relationship, Unilever never has to pay for an ad again, right? So their privacy is protected. They can opt out whenever they want. They can opt in whenever they want. They get a reward for opting in. They get better service from their brands who want to build and maintain that relationship with them. So we should have that rolled out here, hopefully to most of the population in the next 12 to 24 months. So that's the future. Future's pretty much right around the corner.
And last question from my side, and that's to all three of you before we open the audience to talk to you. They have much better questions, I'm sure. Before the meeting started, all three of you were sitting in the anteroom with me, and I was telling you that we are pivoting towards becoming a technology company with a banking license. When I said that to you, all three of you had, I wouldn't call it criticism, but you had some observations on the room that you were sitting in. And you said to me that for a company that hopes to become a technology company with a banking license, what was wrong with that room that you were sitting in next door? And I wouldn't say wrong, what could be different?
Oh, and by the way, I also said, can I have an espresso, please? And they said, oh, we don't have an espresso machine. Like, what? Do you really not have an espresso machine here? Are you still working here? Because there's just sort of kind of things that, but these are visual signs to say, are we going in the direction or not? Like, you need to have an espresso machine with a variety and probably a barista as well, because then it allows people to have choices, because that's what, let's say, and by the way, it's an attitude thing rather than an age thing, but cool people just want to have whatever, interesting coffees rather than having the black coffee that kind of tastes like coffee. But also you have a whole bunch of black chairs, And it did appear to me as though somebody has said, we need to be innovative, so let's have a chair that looks like a triangle, but it's still black. Now, it was all sort of, I mean, it was designed for the sort of the gigantic, whatever, snake meet and greet, which might be a traditional thing. The thing, though, is that when you start to look at how people do things differently, you might have 3 clusters of chairs with maybe a different colored pillow. These things look trivial, but they start sending messages to people to say things have changed. I mean, I did, one of the big German companies was one of my clients, and they had a new CEO, and he didn't wear a tie on the first day. Within 2 weeks, none of the executives wore ties. So what happened? I mean, people follow, and they follow anything. They will follow what they were doing beforehand, but if there is a new thing to go follow, they will follow that too. And I think as you do begin to, let's say, sort of put into practice Imagineering, if your officers are not imaginative, people will see that, and then they'll think, yet another executive slogan, it's not going to work, let's wait it out for 3 years, because we know another one's going to come. And you do as well. So, but it's, if you like, it's sometimes within the sort of organizational change, you pick little battles to say, you know what, we will have 2 different colored pillows. Now, you might then play 2 games. One is you run it through procurement to see if you can get 2 colored pillows. The other thing is you say, can you just bring 2 pillows in next week and we'll see if anybody notices. But this will then allow you to work out, is your organization ready to be innovative, ready to change? But these little things will start to come. Now, then it goes into what will happen when it begins to scale, when everybody has their own colored pillow. When people stop wearing ties. I don't know, but the thing is, you have 5. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So, but right now, the thing is that even if you decide, you know, we are the reserved banks, you've got 5 digital competitors and banks and pretty much fintech, and you'll have people from China coming over. But the other thing as well is that when you decide to suddenly become more like Saudi Arabia than like Saudi Arabia today, like your version, right now, your economy will grow like crazy. And your market, well, I mean, if you look at everybody pounding into Saudi right now, because it's a huge opportunity, that will happen in this country. And it will be a shame if you, as the bank that supported this country for 75 years, basically screw it up and you basically get bought out by some other company because you just did a bad job. This should be your opportunity. You deserve it. You've worked hard for this. But you have to make sure that you are the ones that are ready and pushing it, because it will happen.
Whoosh. I mean, I was admiring the room and think it was a very nice room. So, but maybe that's because I'm wearing a tie. But I think one thing to think about, particularly if you go on the ESG journey and the impact journey and the wide-reaching external stakeholder journey, you'll have people coming into the company that no matter how funky that bit of the organization looks, to them it looks like a bar that they're not spending their resources on because they're trying to solve some other kind of solution. And so your customer base might be thinking something different to what you're thinking inside. When I'm back in London, I always go sit in the funky area, but with my tie on. Yeah, but those with ties wouldn't normally come back the other way. So I think it's an interesting dynamic, and you just got to consciously choose to walk in both directions, it seems to me, because that's about developing that shared language, inside the organization. And I hate espresso. I'd rather have some funky Vietnamese tea, some really great chai, whatever. Yes.
I think we're looking at the time as well. Questions from the audience, and then we can see.
Thank you, first of all of you two, for coming in and sharing your wisdoms. My question is from Mr. William. You just mentioned you come with a learning of 20 plus years of learning in China and 15 odd in India as well. Now, we can use China's examples and case studies as an inspiration, but I would want you to, if you can, touch base some of them from India, because that's how we operate, like we commonly. And the demographics that we have, we will be able to relate more to them. Because I happen to talk to a few people from India, and the way they have been, the way that I have seen them changing in the way they think and they conduct their daily operations or transactions in the last 5 years has drastically changed. With GPay and Paytm coming in, yes, there was a.
That's a question. So let's start with India.
What did the fintechs and the banks over there? I know the government was bent upon doing that, but how did the fintech and the banks over there behave, and what did they do to convince the customer to go almost cashless that we have got?
Yeah, so your goal is not to be so much like India, okay? So what happened in India is it got colonized a second time. It's now controlled by a bunch of Americans and Chinese, and the Indians are just working for them because they didn't compete, right? It's pretty brutal, but that's what happened. They're just like watching the Chinese and the American firms control the thing. Now, India made China illegal, but it still didn't really matter because the big firms there are either American controlled or Chinese controlled or backed. So the goal here, you guys have a huge opportunity to not get colonized again, right? You can do it yourself. And one of the things we're here, it's not like, we call it like learn and then sort of like localize. When we invest, we're trying to be a little bit innovative, but we're not unicorn hunting. I'm not trying to find a company and build it into a big company and find another company over here and build it into a big company. We've invested in 21 companies founded by people who grew up here for the most part. They all went to, we found out after the fact that they all went to local university here. Very few went to university abroad. They might have gone to grad school, but almost none of them went to university abroad. And they're local entrepreneurs solving for local problems. Now, the cool thing, we're trying to take an innovative approach because VC is investing in innovation, but there's very little innovation in VC. So when we invest in a company, we have them sign a commercial agreement with us, where if one of our companies cooperates with one of our other companies, that other company will give them lifetime profit share back. So when we're going up against, was it the Alibaba's Daraz here? Daraz? Yeah, Daraz. So I took Alibaba public. You know, they're very difficult, right? They're hardcore. But our company, Pricesoy, you know, you go for the hard stuff first. So electronics the hardest. But it's not just Pricesoy versus Daraz. It's Pricesoy plus 20 other companies working together against Daraz. And that's how Pricesoy is kicking Daraz's ass.
One thing that we didn't cover in the conversation was the bad R word. So how do you see the economies that have really sort of ramped up in terms of the future, the role of the regulators? And in Pakistan, you know, we're in a pretty much a regulated society. How do you see the best methods for breaking that particular silo down so that they become enablers, even in some of the other ones where you talked about the slowdown, right? Alibaba and Tencent, it was also driven by the concern that the banks are regulated versus this is unregulated. So that was a key difference. So how did they sort of navigate through it, and what lessons can we learn in terms of improving the regulatory environment?
Yeah, he's a regulation guy.
I was a deliberate thing, I think.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So one thing that we learned is when it comes to regulation is you don't ask for permission, you ask for forgiveness. Now that can get you in a little bit of trouble, right? But if you're in the end, if you're helping society, there's always a way. So most of what happened in India and in China didn't happen because of regulation. It happened in spite of regulation. Now, China had the current China approach is not so good, but the previous China approach up until 2018, 2019 was to not really regulate. You just let it go, and as long as consumers or people aren't getting hurt, just go figure it out. And so you had these, ride sharing, for example. Ride sharing in America was illegal, and there was 3,000 ride sharing companies, and then basically the Chinese government waits until there's 10, and then they get them all in a room and say, okay, what should the regulation be? Regulatory here is challenging because there's the regulators here, and then there's the international monetary fund, and then there's it's a challenging thing. It's just another thing that you have to deal with. So the only thing that you can predict is that it's going to be unpredictable. So you just kind of roll with it, right? I mean, we have these companies, and it's like we're not trying to take a lot of money out of the country, right? But we have companies that are having difficulty getting money out of the country we were chatting about this last night, but basically for Umrah pilgrimages, right? So normally, what you would just do is go through the informal monetary system to get the money out of the country. Okay. So it's kind of expensive, but it works. And you guys have this cool Singapore bank, which hopefully we can leverage, right? But the Saudis want clean, like relatively clean. They don't want money coming out of some random Hawala account to go to Umrah pilgrimages. So we need to figure out a way. Now we're going to figure out a way. I think you guys have one solution that hopefully we can tap, which is a legal way around this challenge. I would just think that look at regulation, look at the government. They don't have a scalpel. It's more like a cricket bat. It breaks things, it squashes things, but it can be worked around. And hopefully, as the administrations rotate or come through, you just have to engage them. So far in the past, things were great. Like the convertible note was illegal here, and then they made it legal, right? Unfortunately, somebody got rid of the tax credits for venture capital investment. So it didn't stop us from investing, though. We're still investing, even though we have to pay 20% tax now. Before it was 0. It is what it is.
I think our head of legal would not like the mantra of when it comes to regulation, seek forgiveness, not permission. I think that's
why you partner with a startup.
Yeah, the startup.
It's them.
Yes, them. Okay. Any more questions from the audience?
So my question is for Professor Williams. You gave the example of China, and you talked about how cash money there is almost obsolete because the vendors don't accept it anymore, and because the population is really comfortable with other ways of financial payments, right? But when we look at Pakistan, I feel it's on the other end of the spectrum, and that's simply because people just don't trust financial technology that much. So do you feel that we can take China's model and localize it? Or for this population and to ingrain trust in technology, we need to come up with something completely different?
So the key for us is we try really, really, really hard not to tell our entrepreneurs what to do, okay? Because a lot of times we don't know. Most of the time we don't know. What we do is we help them design experiments. They run the experiments, and then the market and the data comes back, and that gives them a much better idea what they're supposed to do. The answer to the question is I don't really know, but it'll figure itself out. I mean, one of the biggest challenges why the economy might not go super digital super quickly is people are afraid of paying taxes. So if you can sort the tax problem first, then things might go digital a bit faster. But in the end, you don't actually, there's 3 things that you need to drive a tech-driven revolution are internet, relatively inexpensive smartphones, and the ability to pay for things. But doesn't need to be digital payment. I mean, you can survive perfectly well on cash on delivery. And you don't even need to be at home, because we're doing cash on delivery to the local mom and pop shop, e-commerce enabling the neighborhood, just like a Japanese 7-Eleven, where the smartphone or whatever it is gets delivered to the shop, not to the home, right? So there's a good workaround. So I would say I don't know the answer, but the digitization doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use an e-wallet. It just means that you use the technology to make things more efficient. So again, it's not copy paste, it's learn, then localize.
Trust in technology. That's something that probably I figured out. Mark, your view on trust in technology?
Yeah, so it's interesting. If you look at, let's say, fairy tales. So what tends to happen is that sort of in our world of technology right now, and it's a question about whatever China, use of technology, it's a little bit like you look at a fairy tale and say, okay, and then the prince and princess got married, and then somebody says, well, did they kill the dragon first? Oh, I didn't read that bit of the story. So what's happening at the moment, particularly in like sort of, as you're looking at, let's say, the emergence of these technologies, you're starting from the end and you just ignore completely the beginning. How many of you have ever drunk a can of Red Bull? Okay. It's very unlikely that you were in the first target group. So what happened when Red Bull came out, a sort of Thai invention, Austrian guy, strange can, a series of things, is that they started kicking it out through campuses in America. They didn't go to shopping malls in America. They didn't go into whatever, supermarkets and Kroger's in America. They deliberately went to a small number of campuses and they had ambassadors to do Red Bull on campuses because they had to start somewhere. The thing is, I mean, if you look, so I wrote a book on scaling, so I'm fascinated about how things develop, how things scale, and what's one of the, let's say, the interesting secrets in complex systems, let's say too complicated to get into detail about complex systems now, but one of the things is that humans are a little bit lazy. And to conserve energy, we follow ourselves, so we copy what we were doing beforehand, and we copy people like us, because it's easier. So right now, it's designing following behaviors that allow people to say, wow, if people do this, I'll copy it. If you then look at, I mean, what's also quite interesting, if you look at, let's say, country branding. So you look at Qatar doing the World Cup, and there were these mega projects right now. Countries are taking mega project ideas as a way of pretty much conditioning entire countries to behave differently. So I live in Berlin, Germany. And in Berlin, Germany, and I've been there since 2005. Germany is not a particularly fun place, but when they held the World Cup in 2006, there were Germans who were smiling. They were like, what is this? So, but right now but then because of that, in 2007, people would smile and sometimes they might even wave a flag. So right now so when you start looking at creating trust, don't expect to get 100% of the market. You find your niches, you find the things that work for those niches, you design to make it easy for people to follow around those niches, and from there it grows. Don't look at WeChat right now as a financial system from today. Go back and look at when it was first introduced. Look at the first year that it was introduced and the second year that it was introduced. And look at America. America still doesn't have any, I mean, America's messaging platforms for payment is total crap. But American payment systems are awful, absolutely awful, because nobody has quite nailed it yet. But I think another thing, so another helpful thing about living in Berlin, so there's a company called Rocket Internet. So Rocket Internet was founded by three brothers. The three brothers went off to California at the beginning of the internet. They did internships at a big tech, a small tech, and a medium tech. They're like sort of the Brothers Grimm. When they came back, they said, we want to innovate. They came up with an innovative company, failed kind of immediately. But then they said, you know what, screw innovation. Let's just copy eBay. They went to eBay in North America to say, we're copying eBay, we'll run it for you. eBay said, not interested. There is no German market for eBay, not interested. They created a company called Alando. 9 months later, eBay bought them for hundreds of millions, and that was their first thing. They then said, we're going to create a brand new system. It's a news site and everything else. They tried to innovate, failed immediately. They then said, in that case, then we'll make ringtones. That then worked out, because they copied somebody else. And so gradually then, Rocket Internet worked out, we're not going to be innovative at business models. What we will do is we'll copy things from one market and just apply it in other markets and systematically. So right now, even for you, you don't have to think very much. Use the internet, do a Google search to see what other people are doing and copy that. So and you don't have to build out whole technology platforms to do that. Do a screenshot and stick your logo onto it and say to customers, do you think this is nice? So, but I think this is going to be an attitude thing, particularly for the larger organizations, because you have like a corporate way, a big, massive doing things your competitors won't have because they can't have, because they don't have your money and they don't have your people. So they'll take all kinds of shortcuts. So I mean, I think it's interesting that you have got this sort of digital bank stuff. Oh, another suggestion that I have is that your executive team should have an office at the new digital bank place, because it's a sign, it's a signal. If you keep it separate, it's obviously separate. But if they have meetings there once a week and they have a little office, You could even be crazy and give them like a co-working space. Yeah. So yes, so there are ways of building trust and technology, but don't look at the end goal of the case studies and the end goal of the fairy tale. Look to see how things started, and then see what things work, and just be open to trying experiments.
I think this dovetails into the discussion you're just having. So we've heard, is the organization ready for the change? Changing mindset, technology company with a banking license. How do we bring about the change? There are the optics, right? The offices, the behaviors, but most of the leadership, the senior leadership of the bank is sitting in this room. So where do we start? So we create those teams of innovation, we start thinking differently. What's the maths around it? What's the strategy around it? We start talking about it, we have been talking about it for a few years. The constant challenge between we have to perform, we have to deliver, how do we transform? So candid thoughts.
Anybody here got any ideas? Because if you are the executive team in here and you're responsible, anybody got any ideas? You probably have ideas. You just have to be a... So I'm an idiot. I love being an idiot. I'm an extremely clever idiot, but I'm an idiot. So right now, and I'm also very, very lazy. So right now, your executive team, you probably know what needs to be done. Now, there might be one or two elephants in the room that you can't talk about. However, if you don't remove the elephant from your room is full of elephant poop. So that's the first thing. Confront the elephant and move the elephant out. Otherwise, your room is full of elephant poop. You know that because you can smell it. Once you have that, is that sure you could use, which is your favorite consulting firm, McKinsey, Bain? McKinsey. You could just copy what they do, because after all, you'll need a new job afterwards, and so you can rotate in and rotate out. Or you could go for your own people and say, well, what do you think we should go do? Because as you're beginning to change this attitude, I mean, if you just hire McKinsey to do a little report, do this thing, and then all of a sudden there's no tie in the office day, you'll basically be doing the sort of superficial copying of change, but you won't be changing. Now, so fundamentally, the whole world has changed, and it changes between a balance of control and, let's say, sort of taking your hands off the steering wheel. You know World Economic Forum at Davos? So I've done Davos now 15 times. I've done twice as paying the 30,000 to attend. And then afterwards, I created a group called UnDavos, where there's now 5,000 people that go to Davos at the same time. There's a very important practical story for me that illustrates how much the world has changed and how we should be thinking about this. So I was one of the few people in Davos in those days that partied until 2 o'clock in the morning, because I can wake up at 7, go to sleep at 2, fantastic conversations. The thing is, in Davos in those days, in 2008, there were only 3 taxi cabs in Davos because nobody went out to go party. So there are 4 people waiting for taxi cabs at 2 o'clock. First person jumps in the taxi cab, they pay $150. Think about that in terms of your monthly salary. $150 to drive whatever, 25 minutes down the road to get dropped off. Second person does the same. Third person does the same. They're all paying lots and lots of money. I have to wait for an hour for the taxi to come back because there's only 3 taxi cabs. In the old days, it was selfish, it was greedy, they were helping themselves. It was also more expensive, environmentally unsustainable. Now, there's a group called UnDavos. It's a Telegram group. There's a group called Davos Beds and Rides, where somebody will pop a message in saying, in 15 minutes, I'm planning to get a cab from this thing. Does anybody want to join me? Now, all of a sudden, you have 4 or 5 people sharing a cab. One guy, the VC in the cab, says, you know what? I'll pay for it, it's okay. And then you have some of the best conversations ever. So by making things more open, almost like by democratizing information, everybody gets a better experience. It is cheaper, it's more environmentally friendly. Now, the thing is, though, that the old, let's say, powers that be, the control system, they quite like that control system, but it doesn't matter. Look at the demographics. The future is younger, and it's younger in spirit rather than just age, and just look at the mass. This change is inevitable, and it doesn't matter what the control structures want, because it is going to happen anyway. So I think then this is the sort of really interesting balance. But then taking advantage of the brain power in the room, taking advantage of the brain power of your customers, suppliers, using whatever networks, portfolios. You don't have to do everything yourself, and just be lazy.
Yeah, so we help a lot of large organizations with innovation, I guess. Unilever and J&J, and AB InBev and Pepsi and P&G. And so AB InBev is not really, I mean, here I think they maybe sell water, right? But they created this alternative group, and they called it a Disruptive Innovation Group, like literally. And it was a separate company within the company, and they would try things out there, and anything that worked, they would bring to the mothership. Because you don't want to just blow up your bank. You want to try things in a sandbox or in a separate group. Because for them, they missed craft beer, right? That's a pretty big miss. They ended up having to spend a couple $2 billion on a little brewery just so they could catch up a little bit. And they did not want that to happen again, right? So the easiest thing to do is you get together and you make a list of all the different challenges that are out there. For example, the Uber drivers who need cash for their gas, or the mom and pop shops. Maybe we were partnered with you guys for this to give trade credit, right? Or I mean, you just make a list, and you don't have to. The key thing is you don't have to do everything. You just do 1 or 2 or 3. You put a small team on it and see whether you can take a whack at it. And so the easiest thing, how do you get started? Just start.
Well, and by the way, in this day and age, bring ChatGPT onto your team as well, because ChatGPT knows pretty much all of the inventions that have ever been done. It's also read all of Shakespeare, Goethe as well. And so right now then, and particularly, so I've been building apps with this stuff, so it's wackadoodle crazy stuff. You can take pictures of things and have it write code. So you don't even have to sort of come up with the idea. I've just become more and more lazy over time just to say, well, okay, give me whatever 10 ideas on this, but base it on what might happen in Singapore for old people. And it will do it. So there's just a whole bunch of ways where innovation professionals have been doing this, but they can be kind of expensive at times. But if you know, let's say, the prompts that an innovation professional uses in their head, you can then apply it. But I think, so one of the things that I'll be talking about sort of later on today is going to be how do you supercharge an organization? How do you supercharge yourself as a human? There are just some really clever ways of using even just today's crap AI in really, really clever ways to do dramatically sort of cool and brilliant things super fast. Another thing as well, you're international? Yeah. Which are the bigger countries? So Coca-Cola used to be one of my bigger clients, and what Coca-Cola would do is that they wouldn't innovate in their big markets in America. Dangerous idea. What they would do is they would innovate in parallel markets in Australia and other places. You can test it out in Australia because it's kind of like America, but not quite. And if it works, you scale it. So right now, if you have your big mothership market, sometimes there'll be things we don't innovate here. Test it out beforehand, and then you can roll it back in. It's another great way of doing it. And partner with guys like this, because you don't have to do everything. People have done you're not doing rocket science. You're doing easy stuff that has been done before ages and ages. Maybe you fired your last 3 innovation directors, or you're sitting here and you're in a different job now. But so right now, all of these things have been done. None of the stuff you're doing is particularly groundbreaking.
It's all the consulting work. I mean, we run innovation for HSBC, Standard Chart, and DBS, right? And we don't charge them for it. Because as VCs, we're focused on product market fit. And I've got the market, 3 banks, telling me all their problems. And so it takes the risk out. So all I need to do, the market's telling me what they need, and I just need to find the innovative group and the solution. So it takes half the risk out of my business. That's why I have a 10-person corporate, call them corporate innovation team, but anyway, innovation team on my team. Because it's a symbiotic relationship. So,
well, and then when they work, you already have reference customers.
Yeah, exactly.
You see, business.
Hello. I don't know if it's that relevant, but while all of this we understand is a revolutionary process, it's a journey. Hello. Is there any future landscape that we eventually want to achieve? Or it will all just reach to a point where it just exhausts the human while we are trying to cope up with these rapid changes? I mean, the point is there any regulatory body to control the changes, the extent to which we want to, have a future landscape?
It's So when I was here in Pakistan, I think 2019, is there one movie theater in Karachi that had opened up around 17 or 19? And the friend that invited me over had taken me there, and it was packed. I mean, it was tons of very young families that was there, packed, packed, packed. Saudi Arabia, I think, hadn't opened its first movie theater at the same time. And then they did. And even if you think that it's evolution, in that case, it's a revolution, and it's massive almost immediately, particularly when there's pent-up demand to go do something. Sorry.
Yeah, I would say the only advice I have based on the experience in China, India, and around the world is, and even to some extent U.S., though I've been out of the market for a very long time, the government's not going to help you with much of anything. So you do what you can to solve the problems, and you do it in spite of them, right? And if they wake up one day and decide to do things in a better way, that's great. But just assume that they're going to screw it up, right? But you'll get there. You'll get there.
Thank you.
So I have a question for William. It's very heartening to hear you speak about Pakistan in positive terms. Living here, we get a bit overwhelmed with all the political, economic, every aspect of the issue. So I want to hear a little bit more about it. Where do you think we are in the spectrum as you look at India and China? And where do you feel, or we would be at a time where we would reach some kind of critical mass where it will flip over and then it will be unstoppable?
Okay, so if you had one thing that you could do, usually techie people don't go to large government-sponsored. I mean, you sponsored this summit thing, and then there's not that many tech people there. It's like lots of people in suits. The Future Summit, right? I gave a talk yesterday, and it's like, we invested only $5 million in this country. We helped those companies raise another 70 plus million in follow-on capital. And none of that capital and none of that investment came from Pakistan. But there's an opportunity there. It's not like there's a shortage of money here. What there is a shortage of leadership within the business community. So if there's one thing that you can do as leaders in this market, is get these large conglomerates and these large companies to start engaging, right? To start doing things a bit differently. You could call it thought leadership, you can call it whatever you want, but you have the opportunity to be their best banking partner by helping them navigate all this stuff. Like when we're working with HSBC and now Indonesia and India and all these markets, what they're leaning on us for is innovation to bring to their clients, right? And so think about it like a cupcake, or like we're the icing on top. But the key thing is there's still the boring bread dough underneath. That's the base of their business. They make the money. We're just like sort of the icing on top. And that's how they differentiate their business to their clients. So if you can get your business clients to think a little bit more, in a creative way about their businesses, then you can differentiate your business. But one of the negative things here is like most of these conglomerates are, really stuck. Yeah, very much stuck.
Another little personal tip, try to avoid looking at the news. It doesn't help. I mean, and particularly don't look at political discussion shows, terrible ideas. Because they're talking about things that haven't happened. So therefore you get really involved, and also stop looking at social media. And the social media companies, particularly around 2011 in the United States, they worked out what gets most engagement, and what gets most engagement is controversy. So the things they pop to the top of your thread right now are all controversial stuff to make you angry, because that will increase your eyeballs to watch shitty adverts. So don't look at it. Easy. I mean, it can't be that hard. Just don't look at it. Because that frees up your time to, I mean, if you look at American business, I mean, relatively few American business people, yes, they might go along to the 10,000 plate dinner, but they're not really listening to the people there. They're just doing it because everybody else is doing it, they're following. But avoiding, I mean, they just focus on business. What do customers want? Delight your customers, make sure your staff are happy, and, because that's hard enough. If you start to take, basically, you're almost like a political campaigner yourself trying to do business. Terrible idea. Stop it.
Thank you all. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you to our participants. Thank you very much.